everybody. Man, it's good to be back. It's been a while since I hosted one of these, but I always have so much fun. Thanks for joining us. This is another awesome community event for the Sales Hacker community. As you're rolling in, first things first, because you know what you signed up for. I'm not going to talk about the title too much, but go down to the chat. Because if you've been here before, you know how we do the live webinars. You're not going to watch. You're not just going to sit there and watch today. This is interactive. You got to have some conversation. So go to the chat and introduce yourselves. But before you do that, make sure you change the little blue. See that little blue bubble? Instead of saying panelists, change it to panelists and attendees. That way y'all can see each other's conversations. Tell us like your title, your job title, maybe where you work, maybe where you live, maybe your favorite snack food. We were talking about that. We got some Oreo lovers here. I think mine would have to be popcorn. I just love popcorn. The smell of it more than anything.
I'm gonna go straight protein on you, Colin. Beef jerky.
Oh,
Dried beef is my go-to.
that's like a caveman snack. I mean that in the most non-derogatory way possible, but it is just like there's a primal
guilty
aspect
guilty
to that.
as charged. Yep.
All right, everybody. So appropriately, because end of month is tomorrow, for some of us, end of quarter is tomorrow. We're talking about some parts of the closing process here today. And to help us solve all your problems, we've got oil and vinegar, normally two very opposing forces, the urgency of sales and the risk avoidance of legal. We're going to make that feel like much more of a partnership for you here today. We've got some good tips, tricks, stories, examples, all kinds of things to talk about. We're going to help you work better with your legal team, or if you're in legal, work better with sales. Ben Findley, thanks for saying hi. I'm serious, attendees. You have to introduce yourselves, or we're not going to start. You got to say hi.
So, Colin, you mentioned that we're going to try and solve these problems, but hopefully we don't just reinforce pre-existing stereotypes. But that's always a risk. But we'll try to steer away from that.
Yeah, well, you caught me there. It was a trick statement. Yeah, we're going to solve the problem by realizing that there doesn't have to be a problem. There isn't necessarily a problem to begin with. Cool. So really quickly, I want to introduce our guests. You just heard from James. James Larson is General Counsel and VP of Legal at Conga. And we'll talk a little bit about Conga in a second. But James, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you. And Doug Gilkey is also here. He's your colleague, VP of Commercial Sales at Conga. So y'all work together like spaghetti and meatballs, peanut butter and jelly, just working together all the time.
Peanut butter and jelly. Peanut butter and jelly. That's my go-to over double stuffed Oreos. But James and I are here in beautiful Broomfield, Colorado, just down the hall from each other at the Conga HQ, closing out Q2 today and tomorrow. So it's been a busy 3 days, and the next day and a half are going to be equally busy. So thanks, Colin, for having us.
Thank you. So I was just going to say, thanks for giving us each some of your time today. And thanks to the audience as well for taking some of your time. We value your time. So here's what you're going to get today. We're going to make this interactive. You can ask questions. If you want to ask questions in the chat, you can do it there. If you want to talk to James or Doug, or like share a scenario and maybe get some advice, or just share your thoughts, you can raise your hand. There's a little raise hand button down there. We'll bring you up. You can talk with these two guys. And let's jump in, shall we? I want to start off by quickly saying I did a poll yesterday on LinkedIn, and I'm going to show you the results of that poll. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to ask you all to take the poll. So here's the poll. If you're watching, please answer this question. My legal team is...
You left one off, Colin. There should be a fifth option. It should be most important group in the company.
I didn't want to. I'm sorry, James. It's just a trap.
I'll just put other here, and that'll be my vote. Okay.
That's fair.
James was breaking up. I didn't hear what he said. Colin, did you hear what James said? He was breaking up.
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. All right.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh. You're not building my confidence, man.
All right. So let's see. Let's show the results here for everybody. All right. So usually pretty helpful. Most people say a legal team is usually pretty helpful. Very few of you say it's a necessary evil, which, I think is a good thing. By the end of this conversation, you're going to be thinking more like that fourth answer, like, oh man, I can't wait to work with my legal team. And let me just show you, when I put this poll on LinkedIn, these are the results I got. So y'all, I think, might be a little bit more advanced than the folks who answered this poll on LinkedIn. Necessary evil was the winner here with 41% of the responses, which I think, unfortunately, is usually, sorry to say it, James, but that's a stigma. It's an unfair stigma.
I think they're either more enlightened or just kinder because they know I'm here seeing the results, and so they just didn't want to offend me. That's probably, thank you, by the way. That's very thoughtful of you all.
Either way, I'm proud of them. So anybody want to share? So however you answered, if you want to share why you answered that way, I think we'd be curious to hear it. Raise your hand or just drop a note in the chat if you want to share what your view is. And I'll share. And I think, when so a little background on me, I used to have a role where I was selling. I was an account manager at a marketing agency. We didn't have a legal team, but I did have, work that I did with my customers, legal teams. And I had, VPs and directors who had to sign off on the contracts that I put together. And my view at the time, I'm sorry to say, James, was of the unenlightened variety. Usually, here's how it would go. I would do all the selling and wait to talk to legal after I put something on paper. So the first time they get any kind of insight is after the customer and I have a verbal agreement. They hear, here's what we have to do. And then they have to say, sorry, here's a problem. Or my VP would step in and go, too bad you sold that because you can't do that. And so my view was, well, gosh darn it, let me go make the money, right? I think I'm maybe putting words, pointing at what the secret is here, but we want to talk a little bit about, let's hear from, so Kevin Goodnight. Hi, Kevin. Says our legal team is required, but elongates the closing process and has to be reminded to finish reviewing documents.
Yep, that would be frustrating. I can absolutely understand that.
Yeah, I think, to answer Kevin, to help Kevin out is, certainly here at Conga over the last 2+ years I've been here, James has been here 5+ years, having an early conversation between sales and legal pre this situation, Kevin, heck, we're in the throes of, managing upwards, this week, probably 50 to 75 contracts, closing the quarter. But the relationships that James and his team and my team of sellers have at this point at the quarter is based on a foundation that's been laid over the last 12 months. So earlier in the year, and our teams have collaborated to build that relationship. And I think just to hit Kevin's, point on collaboration is, James, comment on this, but we've built this relationship of trust. And, usually when I hit you with something, it's urgent, right? And you're like, okay, I don't hit you with a bunch of junk and just because we've built
absolutely
trust.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. And so just to kind of continue on that point about legal being either necessary evil or elongating the process, that some of that's going to be a little bit inevitable because of the inherent friction between the core mandates of sales and then sort of the perceived role of legal, right? But I think some of that's outdated. Here at Conga, we really try and be deal facilitators, and Doug mentioned the relationships, right? And that trust. I think what that means is that we both know that neither of us is going to try and play games with the other, and that's a big deal, right? Doug knows that when I have to put the brakes or, hey, ask the question about this particular provision or this whatever, he knows I'm not doing it just for the sake of doing it to say something to, I feel like I have to I get paid by the word, so to speak, right? He knows that it's real, but bringing that up, he knows it's also not a deal killer. It's just, hey, we have this issue. Let's work together to figure it out, right? And vice versa. I know that when Doug reaches out to me or one of the other sales leaders, that it's not necessarily to find fault or to complain, but it's simply a, hey, I need your help here. Can you take a look at it? And I know that it's legitimate. It's a legitimate ask. It's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. Remember that old fairy tale? At Conga, we have this really nice sort of relationship in the sense that if every single deal got escalated, that would dilute the value of an escalation, right? And so I really appreciate Doug and his sales leaders to not do that. And so when they come to me, I know it's something I need to pay attention to. So I immediately go in information gathering mode, right? And try to understand, okay, where are we in the process? I talk to my team member, I talk to the core sales rep, the lead sales rep, understand what's going on, and then we work together to propose a path forward. So, I mean, the pre-existing relationships is a really big deal. Setting expectations early in the process. Colin, you mentioned that, your MO back in the day was get kind of everything verbally agreed, throw it over the fence to legal, and then sort of inevitable red flags went up because that was probably the first time legal had been engaged, right? Obvious challenges with that is, you probably shied away from some of the more difficult conversations early on in the process because you were in sales mode, which forced your legal team to kind of ask lots of questions. And why did you say this? Why did you agree to that? We can't do that, right? And so just setting expectations early and upfront. I mean, like Doug's teams know there's just certain deal breaker issues for us, right? And they don't shy away from those hard conversations early in the process. So, when we do get engaged at whatever point in the pre-sale process that is, we know that the customer has already been educated on some of those really important deal breaker issues. And so when I have to bring them up, it's not the first time they've come up. So that's very helpful as well.
When you talk about the relationship between you and Doug specifically and your teams, how long have you two worked together, Doug?
Just over a year?
James, just over a year. It was May of, I think I first met James May or June of last year.
Yeah, so last year, I came from Aptus Corporation, and Doug is from Legacy Conga Corporation, right? And so we merged together last May, and that's May of 2020. And so that's when we started working together.
You two have an excellent report. Watching you, banter back and forth earlier. So it's not, I was sitting here feeling like you've been working together for years and you know everything about each other. What do you think it is? Do you think that's a personality thing, or is there some kind of process or cultural thing going on at Conga that extends beyond just the relationship between you two?
I'll weigh in, James, and then I'll just quickly. I think in my experience as both a seller and a sales leader in the high tech software space over the last 15 or so years, is really having an understanding of the benefits of what legal brings to the table in a discussion, right? And we're hearing that from our attorneys' lips to our ears, and then as a leader is conveying that to a team of 25 plus sellers, because many of these sellers, where I was in my career 15 years ago, they don't know anything about a 8, 9, 10-page contract, limitations of liability. Like, what the heck is that? I studied English at the University of Colorado here in Boulder. I don't know about liability, right? So James and approaching James and his team to say, hey, listen, if you could take the time to just educate our sellers about, number one, the value in the items that are in the contract, because there's so much value in there in how we deliver services as a company, how folks in our space are just, how companies deliver their services or products. So help educate us on that value. As a first step, I have found that to be a very, I've yet to find that be a non-approachable kind of ask of a legal team, and James and his team have been very helpful and open to educate us so that we can be smarter as we go into a sales campaign or a sales cycle And so that, I think that for me and for our team, that's been the foundation of kind of this sharing of information, and having the real grasp that the legal team is of value for us as sellers, as well as the company, of course, but value for us as sellers as we approach a conversation with a prospect or customer.
Yeah, and a couple specific and practical ways that we've tried to accomplish exactly what Doug was talking about in terms of educating the sellers on, what is liability, what is indemnification, some of these risk allocation provisions in contract. Is we've prepared two documents, right? You'll hear the acronym MSA, which is a Master Services Agreement, right? That's the sort of the core template that we use to sell Conga SaaS. And we prepared what we call an annotated MSA. Okay, it's essentially just the core template, but then in the margins we had those bubble comments like in Microsoft Word, right, where we say this is what this means, this is why it's important, be careful, watch out for this type of issue, right? For example, limitations of liability was one that Doug mentioned, right? That's a risk allocation provision as compared to a kind of a performance obligation. That's a sort of a different type of contract clause. But liability is kind of a risk allocation, right? There's no right or wrong. It's just, where's that line? Where are you going to draw that line, right? And so here's why it matters, right? If everything works great, if there's never any issues with the contract or performance on either side, it never comes out of the drawer. But here's what could happen, and here's why it matters, right? That's just one example. Another one might be payment terms or warranties or SLAs or any number of things that are in a contract. We just kind of have bubbles in the margins. Think about this. Here's what it means in layman's terms. Another thing is talk track, right? And so we try and enable the sellers to be able to respond to initial, what's the right word? Initial pushback on this or that clause, like termination rights. That's kind of a big one, right? So when customers say, I want to be able to exit the contract on 30 days notice for whatever reason or no reason at all, right? That kind of blows up the concept of a committed relationship. Accountants hate it because it doesn't allow them to recognize that revenue. Reps hate it because they don't get paid their commissions. All those kind of things. Why it's a bad idea. And so we have a policy against that. And so we give them a talk track of how to respond to those types of questions or pushback from a customer. This is why we do or don't do this or that. We found that to be really helpful too. Constantly being revised, right? Because the market is always evolving, right? It's almost like procurement departments. I mean, Doug's primarily on the sell side. I get involved in obviously selling, but also buying SaaS, right? And so, the landscape out there for buying and selling software is evolving, right? So an issue that may have been, in vogue 3 years ago, which was on everyone's, radar, and it was the most important thing in the world, that's now shifted to something else, right? And so before it might have been, we want uncapped liability for this or that. Now it's shifted to, we want expanded warranties or something. So it's always evolving, which means those, documentation I just mentioned, the annotated MSA and the talk track are always evolving as well. And so I just wanted to share those two specific practical things that you might want to reach out to your legal departments to ask them to prepare for you, to educate your sellers and help you all to respond to that initial round of sort of either pushback or conversations you have with the customer on some of those non-traditional, non-commercial, more risk-related contract provisions that they come up inevitably.
Good call out.
It sounds like it would help sellers kind of put on a legal hat for a second and consider those things while they're selling and help them be more proactive in reaching out when they need to talk to someone on your team, James. Doug, what do you all do to help James's team do the opposite and consider the perspective and the urgency and the timing and inherent in being a seller? Is there something like a reverse partnership in that direction?
Yeah. So fundamentally is understanding. So James talked about an annotated MSA or whatever the applicable, whether you're talking about an NDA or BAA, business associate agreement or non-disclosure agreement, whatever legal agreements you have to go through as a seller. And different sizes of businesses have different flexibility. I'm working for a pre-revenue company versus working for a $5 billion a year, $20 billion a year company. The latitude that you have as a seller and as a legal representative is very different.
And
so
your leverage,
I think really
leverage as well, right?
And your leverage, yeah, absolutely. So it's understanding as a seller, you don't want to be backed into a corner like, okay, now I got to get the contract through. I'm working for a $20 billion a year company. There is no modification, right? Take it or leave it. In some cases we have that here at Conga. Whereas if you're working for a pre-revenue or $5 million a year company, heck, you could have a lot of flexibility depending upon what your go-to-market is. Yeah. So I think it's lining up the business objectives with the sellers and the legal team is super important. But to kind of facilitate that, the understanding of the opportunity, here at Conga, we did this very early before I got here, but I've done this at previous companies, is having this kind of common foundation of communication around opportunities. So not a huge surprise, but could be. We use Salesforce. Our products are built on the Force.com platform. And in that is how James and I and James' team and my team communicate about requests from customers. That's where we keep the history. That's where we keep notes and phone calls and emails and all the good stuff that my team and myself as sellers and even James and his team, as they communicate with our customers, that's where it all sits. So making sure that all of that information is available. So James and his team aren't like guessing, oh, well, who are they talking to? Are they talking to they're working with, I don't know, General Electric. Are they talking to a legal clerk at a division in, some remote office, or are they talking to general counsel at GE, right? So we have some idea of who's at the table to have the conversation. So I think having that common platform such that we're on the same page and we're all seeing that information in real time. And then as a sales leader and a seller, ensuring that our teams are making that information available to James and his team through the conversation. We use Chatter like I've never seen a company use Chatter before. It's awesome. If you have any desires or like questions like how do you use Salesforce Chatter the best way, this communication between legal and sales is phenomenal. It's awesome. So, Colin, hope that answered your question.
Yeah. To add to Doug, some of the things that we try to instill in the legal team to make sure we understand the seller's perspective, right? That was kind of I think the point of your question, right, Colin, is we subscribe very seriously to this notion that we're all in sales. That's where it all starts, right? So, I mean, sales, to put it simply, pays the bills. Okay, and we know that, and I know that legal is a cost center, not a profit center, right? And so, our attorneys, many of them, just incidentally, have also been to business school, right? And so you kind of get both sides of that. It's difficult for me to hire. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't normally hire from law firms. Because the law firm objective or the law firm focus is I win, you lose, or if I lose, that means you won. That's not how we approach this, right? It was ingrained into my head early that when you're in an in-house counsel role, it should not be adversarial. I mean, sometimes that's inevitable when there's litigation in other disputes, but 99% of the time, it's not a one and done type of an interaction with your customer, right? It's a relationship that you hope to have for many years. SaaS is all about, a multi-year subscription to an application, a cloud-based application, right? We're going to interact with these people for many years to come. Last thing you want to do is set the wrong tone up front, be overly rigid on stuff that doesn't really matter. And so that's something that we really try and do is remember that sales pays the bills, focus on the must-haves, not the nice-to-haves, right? And maintain that longer-term perspective of a partnership with the other side, not they're the adversary. And that helps a lot for us to maintain the proper perspective and not take ourselves too seriously.
I bet it does. And I think, a lot of people on this call might be a little jealous of the culture y'all have built there around that. Because sometimes salespeople feel like they're pulling the whole company behind them and really pulling. Let's switch gears for a second, because when I introduced you both, we didn't get to talk much about Conga. So Conga is a global leader in revenue operations transformation, focusing on, what would you call it, the quote to cash process?
Quote to cash or lead to revenue. Yep.
Quote to cash, lead to revenue process.
Right.
And so I think the reason that's relevant and interesting is that you not only practice this motion in a unique way between the two of you, you also get to talk to hundreds, thousands of other companies about this all the time. And you've seen everything, I'm sure. When you speak to customers and prospects these days, like right now, what kind of trends are you seeing?
They need to make our project a priority and purchase in the next 48 hours. Priorities coming out of a global pandemic, right? I know we're all experiencing kind of, hey, my project should be a priority. There's a lot of activity going on. So tongue in cheek there. But what we do in digital transformation, specifically in revenue operations, is over the last 6 months for sure, but kind of the trailing 12, 18 months, absolutely a top 3 priority for most businesses: high-tech SaaS, financial services, healthcare and life sciences, and manufacturing, which can fit across all 3. But those are the 4 verticals that we serve the most. So what is lead to revenue? What is quote to cash? We're all in sales. When that lead comes in, either a hand raiser through your website, comes into your inbound BDR, or your outbound SDR makes that call, get someone that's interested, that's a lead, to the point where you actually send them an invoice for services, right? So that's the lead to revenue business process. Everything in between is Salesforce automation, capturing information, generating a quote, generating a rich, probably before quote, a rich proposal, generating a configured quote, right? Here at Conga, we have bundled solutions. If you look at a quote, it's got, anywhere from 2 to 20 line items on it, right? Well, us as sellers, I just did it before this get together, is put a quote in Salesforce, right? And then when we're at a point is generating a contract, reviewing that contract, in communication with James's team, and negotiating that contract, getting it signed electronically with Conga Sign, and then once that's done, sending an invoice. So that process, generally in companies from 5 people to 5,000 people, which is the market that my team serves, is not automated. Generally, very small percentage. Meaning that these folks in the call can probably relate. End of month, right? You're grabbing a contract from a shared drive, Google, SharePoint, whatever. You're putting it into an email. You're sending that off to a customer. Hopefully they put track changes on, whether it's a NDA, MSA, quote, whatever that may be. They send it back. You send it to your equivalent of James, right? A lot of manual processes, and there's a lot of friction. Having been in that, we're not here at Conga, thankfully. So the friction is very, very low, if any, as we go through that lead to revenue business process. But because everything that we do is captured in a single system. So when we look at a kind of the end state, nirvana for our customers or prospects, is completely automating that lead to revenue process, ideally in a single system. Most of our folks are on Salesforce. So that's because of the nature of our products are built on the Force.com platform over the last 15 years. Pretty cool. So end state is completely automating that process and making it very frictionless for sellers to do their job, and especially, frankly, making it, dare I say, enjoyable to have like communications between James and I about as we negotiate terms and so forth. So a little verbose, Colin, but hopefully that.
No, that's a great answer.
Can I jump on one point here, Colin, that Doug made there at the end about kind of winning together? one thing that Doug and the sales leadership, and I think I'm speaking to primarily sellers, right, and sales leaders. Doug and his peers are very generous with their compliments. They're very generous with their acknowledging of not just legal, but other stakeholders that are involved in the deal cycle. It goes a long way. You know, everyone likes to be recognized in terms of the effort they put in, and just simple thing whenever we close a significant sized deal here at Conga, almost pretty much every time. I'm not sure if it's an official policy, Doug, or it's just you guys are all nice people. But there's almost always an email that goes out and just say, here's what we did. Here's sort of the core deal terms. Here's the products. Here's the revenue. Here's the deal team I want to recognize for their outstanding efforts. That's pretty cool. And that also, it's a small thing, but it goes back to that relationship, conversation we've had before. But I mean, Colin, if I could jump in, earlier you asked about trends, right? Sort of trends, what you're seeing. Doug's closer, obviously, to the customers, but I imagine that my legal team is similar in terms of the trends that the issues we face here at Conga. We're a relatively small team. There's 9 of us, right? And so, and Ben, I saw your question about technology. We'll get there in 1 second. What keeps me up at night are things like, what am I missing, right? Or due diligence, like in M&A transactions. What am I missing? Is there some risk out there I'm not aware of? Version control, right? Lack of sort of renewal tracking. We've got 12,000 customers. When do I have to start thinking about renewals? All these are things that technology can help you with. And Ben, I saw your comment jump up on the screen. It's okay, Colin, if I kind of address that, kind of jump into that.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. So Doug talked about Conga, what we are, right? We expand that core CRM functionality into lead to revenue. We automate a lot of the otherwise manual middle office processes like generating quotes, proposals, contracts, signatures, etc. Start small, right? I mean, don't let yourself become a slave to a system. Okay, everyone has different workflows, use cases, and needs. My small team, we don't need the Cadillac version, right? Conga Enterprise CLM can do pretty much everything except butter your toast, right? In terms of just
CLM being contract lifecycle management.
There you go, contract lifecycle management. And that's what I live in, right? Doug's team might live more in CPQ, which is configure, price, and quote, just by nature of our roles, right? But I don't need a super complicated set of configurations to approve every word change or to have 9 levels of approval. We're relatively small. We can still communicate through chatter, like Doug mentioned earlier, and we can't pick up the phone or whatever. So for those of you that are considering, or your companies are considering technology to kind of automate some of these processes we're talking about, don't be afraid to start small and grow from there. Because if you bite off more than you can chew, your adoption is going to suffer. The likelihood of kind of either a failed or at least protracted implementation project goes way up. Start simple, right? Start just with a quoting tool. Start with just a system for your NDAs, for example. Automate that process. Once you got that down, once everyone's on board, you can add agreement records to that. You can add workflows, and if you want to then introduce an approval workflow, do it later. Don't feel the need to do everything at one time. I've done both. Okay, I've had both experiences the past 10, 12 years. The better experience for everyone has been when you start small and build incrementally on that.
I think, James, I totally agree with that. Having worked for smaller companies, and Conga, we're a mid-sized company. Starting small and having that foundation laid collaboratively, like not sales saying, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to communicate with legal, or vice versa, right? But you get into a room, you say, all right, we need to make sure that we're all using the same, and frankly, finance is in that as well. Our CFO's Bob Pinkerton, his organization, works in the same system, but having all the stakeholders that are involved in reviewing what are legal documents. It's worth, as a sales leader, probably not for the quota carrying sellers, right? They're going to benefit from that common platform, but spending the time just to lay out, and it could be could be a morning, could be an afternoon, but you come out of there with a common understanding and agreement of this is how we're going to communicate together. Super, super important.
So this is interesting. I don't know that you need to necessarily make a business case for working this way because it just sounds so common sense. But I do wonder if there are metrics or KPIs that y'all look at, or where you've seen benefit from the way that at Conga, the way sales works with legal.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is, and what comes to mind immediately, and James, if you have some as well, but we actually contracted, this was pre-acquisition by Thoma Bravo, but it was end of 2018, 2019, we contracted Forrester to come up with these exact metrics, right? So
really?
in particular, the one that stands out the most, the two that stand out the most, one is time to revenue. So everyone wants to book, everyone in sales and legal, right? We want that time between when that lead to revenue process to be as short as possible, because we want to start collecting revenue for the valuable services that we deliver as soon as possible. So no one wants, to James's point, no one wants a protracted process for that takes 3, 6, whatever the measure is, 9 months to get a contract reviewed and signed, right? Let's do it as fast as we can. And with the foundation of having this communication and just having a common platform of communication and how you approve things, doesn't mean you have to, purchase a system to implement. You can see upwards of 25 to, I think it's like 34% reduction. So if it took you 3 weeks to negotiate a contract before having this foundation laid, you can look at something, 25 to 34% reduced from 3 weeks to get a contract done. So you're invoicing for those services faster. Also, in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% improvement in internal customer satisfaction, or net promoter score, which we measure internally as a seller in doing the job. Because we all know, as sellers and sales leaders, if you saddle a seller with a protracted, manual, confusing, friction-loaded process to get to that commission check, close that deal, get that customer billing, and get your commission, you're not going to have that seller very long. They're not going to be happy, and it just sucks. So making that process simple, frictionless, you can see up to a 40 to 50% reduction, or I should say increase in internal customer satisfaction.
And happy sellers makes happy customers.
Exactly. Yep.
And on the legal side, we use, we've got metrics as well. Things like, time to turn a draft, or how many of this certain agreement type did we support or did we close in a given period, whether it's a week, month, quarter, whatever, right? And so, the metrics that Doug threw out there about, time to recognize revenue and having that go down and having satisfaction go up, a lot of that's because some of these tools we're talking about, they keep data right at your fingertips, right? They keep it right in your face. So like every day, for example, I get and some of this is standard Salesforce reporting, right? This isn't all, Conga CLM or Conga CPQ. Some of it's standard with Salesforce and other CRM apps, right? But, every day I get a report of, we call it an ISR, internal service request. That's the core vehicle by which legal is engaged, if not through the CLM tool. But anyway, I get a report of any unassigned support requests, right? I get a report every week of, any ISRs or, support requests that were open more than a week that still aren't closed. So it's just constant access to data to be able to act on that has been really helpful for us, in terms of supporting our clients, which are, people like Doug and other stakeholders in the company. So that's those are some metrics that we use internally in the legal department to provide better support to our clients, or in this case, the sales reps.
So you talked a little bit about technology there. An interesting stat we had. We just finished, and for those of you in the audience who might be interested to hear this too, we just finished a very in-depth study of all kinds of sales stack, pieces of the sales stack. And one of the questions we asked was about adoption. And a scary fact was that almost all of the respondents use Salesforce. This is over 1,000 different organizations. Almost all of them use Salesforce. Only 40% of them reported having high adoption of Salesforce. So when we talk about friction, sometimes the tech is actually part of that friction when it's not designed for the process you're asking it to handle. You've already mentioned how you use Salesforce Chatter in kind of an innovative way. It sounds like a very common sense way to have sales reps talking to their business partners and attorneys about deals as they progress. What else is an important piece of the tech stack that allows y'all to do this? I imagine Conga is a piece of it. Has to be, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just a quick pitch on that. Before, I had used Conga, so we have a document generation tool, and I've not to date myself, but I will anyway. I've been using Salesforce for 20 years, and not until I've used Conga at a previous employer did I have the ability to create a really rich piece of content at an account or an opportunity level for a prospect inside of Salesforce, right? It was always copy, cut, and paste. And I know there's people nodding their head going, yep, we're there. You know, I'm taking this information out of Salesforce, I'm copying it into a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document, right? And this is the beginning of that lead to revenue process. So when you create an opportunity, you go in, right there. If you put a base bundle, if you have a price book in Salesforce, great. If you're just using you're putting in a pricing from a price book, that's fine, right? Well, people start there, but once that's in there, having the ability to create a Google slide or PowerPoint or PDF or a piece of rich content that you can then, Colin, this is what we did with you guys, right? As we're working with you, is create an executive briefing deck right in Salesforce using Conga, and then automatically send that, and then have the ability to look at, okay, how is it viewed? Where is it viewed, and so forth. That's a piece of tech, certainly on the Salesforce platform, but giving a seller that tool, because certainly managing sales teams for almost 10 years and being a continual seller and learner, creating rich content as a seller to be compelling for a buyer is all over the map. And it's one of the biggest hurdles that salespeople have, right? Where's my latest pitch deck? Where's my latest product content? Where's my latest briefing document? Where's my latest press releases, right? I mean, you find yourself spending all day trying to put together one document for, outreach.io, and that just sucks as a seller. It just straight up sucks. So having that embedded in your CRM is pretty tight from a tech perspective. That's one piece I would say, and then we use the integrated piece of Salesforce Inbox, because as a leader, I'm hammering on 25 sellers. I'm sure people are like, oh yeah, I can hear Doug hammering on me about activity tracking, right? Emails, phone calls, all that stuff, and that's more important now than ever as we come out of this pandemic. All of us are trying to figure out how buyers buy. How do they find you, right? How does someone actually, where do I fall as a priority perspective? It's all over the map, right? So being able to look at that data and then focus our efforts. So using something like Salesforce Inbox integrated with Gmail or Outlook, where you can tag all of that activity, or an integrated tool like Outreach, right? We've been using Outreach for a bit now, and even I use Outreach. I create sequences. I send them out to people. It's freaking easy. So that's another piece of tech that's super valuable for our engagement process, and all that data at the account level is super important as we get through the buying process and ultimately move to close. So James and his team probably don't see a lot of that data with regards to the engagement, but it's very important. There's a few pieces in there.
Right on. Real quick, just we've got 15 minutes left, so if you're watching and you got a question, a challenge, just an observation to share about how sales and legal teams can work together maybe more efficiently, more effectively, drop it in the chat and we'll make sure you get an answer. We talked a little bit, James, about how to start this process when Ben asked that question about, if we're just starting this process of like digitizing our sales process, where do we begin? You talked about starting small. From either of you, any other advice for leaders who wanted to start championing changes like this?
Well, I would say think about the pain points that are highest priority for your particular enterprise, right? Is it repository, right? Do you have filing cabinets full of paper contracts that you have no idea what's in them? Is risk mitigation one of the more important sort of priority pain points? Is it version control? Is it is it template management? What I mean by that is every enterprise has a series of templates. Those are constantly revised over time for a number of reasons. Some of this technology, Conga CLM certainly allows you to manage those templates. I can go in and upload that template. All of a sudden, every global sales rep in the company has access to that most current template at their fingertips, right? So kind of focus on what business problems you want to focus on first and try and solve, and then start there, right? Whether it's, hey, my NDA process is broken. We're hard to work with because it takes me a week to get an NDA, and by then, customers have moved on or whatever, right? It's just kind of focus on what your immediate priorities are, high, medium, low, focus on the high first, start small, and build from that. That's one recommendation I would have.
Well, love it. Makes sense.
I would
go ahead, Jeff.
I would leave folks with just one nugget of as we're at the end of the month, we're all hopefully all are negotiating contracts right now at the end of the month, or if it happens to be the end of your fiscal quarter as well, like it is ours. Working, and working with James and his team, we have had multiple requests in the last week, specifically around two areas of our master services agreement: limitations of liability and indemnification. Right. So if I just, as a seller, if I just scared you and you went, what does that mean? My homework assignment for you is to go sit and have lunch or coffee with, or a Zoom meeting with your counsel, internal or external, and have them explain to you what those two sections of your legal agreement, or whatever your agreement is that you sign with a customer or prospect, what those mean to the business. And I was fortunate to have a legal business partner 2 companies ago do that for me with our finance team, and as a seller, being able to articulate these kind of outlandish asks around indemnification and liability limitations, really for me to be able to articulate up front to say, hey, if you're going to ask for these significant things that are really outside of our ability to conform to, what you're really asking for is to change the shape of our business and what those things are. As an example, some people often in SaaS ask for uncapped liability, right? If whatever happens to my business as a buyer of your service, if something goes wrong, there's no cap on liability. Well, as a business, James and I own this business, there's no way on God's green earth that we can buy an insurance policy to cover our business. It's not possible. So it's an ask, and people ask for this. People legitimately ask for uncapped limitations on liability. That means if we don't deliver as advertised, customers can come, sue us for whatever they want. There's no possible way whatsoever that as a supplier of services, we can deliver on that. We can't buy an insurance policy to cover that. We don't have enough money in the bank to deliver on that. This is not going to happen. So as a business to business conversation, kind of setting those expectations, and that's like I said, that was a learning exercise for me. I'd say about 10 years ago, just sitting down and understanding what these things mean. to the business. So
Yeah,
take that as a,
right, because
as a nugget.
Yeah. And
it's
Kevin,
more
I
than
look
just
like
the things in between you and the signature. There are actual, can be real consequences.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, James.
No, I was going to say, Kevin, Mr. Goodnight threw up another chat about intellectual property rights. Is another common issue that comes up in the tech space, and that's absolutely right. And your deal attorney can walk you through the various components of intellectual property and what is important to your company. For example, our company, IP is our lifeblood, right? And so, when customers want to kind of claim ownership of a piece of the functionality that we productize or that we may build for them, that's a problem, right? Because we want to be able to reuse that, right? Even if it was their idea, even if we initially built it and they paid for it for them, we don't want to be constrained to reuse it again and to constantly improve the product. And one more point on IP is, and make sure and this is something you can tell your customers in the SaaS space, and it may extend to your particular business a lot or little. We continually improve the product, right? That's what SaaS is. It gets better over time, and your customers today are the beneficiaries of that process over the past 10 years. So when they claim, well, I want to be able to own this, I don't want you to be able to use it again. No, well, that's not how it works, because you are the beneficiary of everyone that came before you, and then my customers in 5 years are going to be the beneficiaries of things I create 10 years ago and between now and then, right? So that's a pretty compelling explanation of why IP rights in a tech company are so important. It's to be able to continue to improve on the product and not just have it be stagnant, but rather dynamic.
Great point. Yeah. Love the way you handled that hypothetical objection. Any other questions from the community? I think we've hit the end of the questions. Thanks everybody for awesome participation. Doug and James, anything that we haven't talked about, we left out, you think would be beneficial to add?
Oh yeah. Yep.
I mean,
make sure you hug your lawyer.
Yeah.
Hashtag lawyer today.
Lawyers. Hashtag hug your lawyer. The lawyers have feelings too, as do sales leaders. So.
And we talk about friction, right? Friction, use it, right? Use it for good, right? Friction can create energy, right? Use that energy to drive performance. There's always going to be slightly different mandates from sales and legals. That's on purpose, right? It's checks and balances. The trick is to understand where each other's coming from, and then be one team. And I think we've kind of accomplished that. I think at Conga, we're constantly pivoting and tweaking the way we interact to improve that. Look at available tools that you're using today, and think about some of the tools we've been talking about, whether it's CRM, Conga, CPQ, CLM, Chatter, Teams, right? And just think about making an incremental step toward reducing or minimizing some of those pain points that are present in your own business, and then just keep taking incremental steps. And pretty soon you'll be amazed at where you started and where you are.
Yeah, just start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Great advice. All right.
Perfect.
Well,
thanks, Colin.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Like I said,
the
end of the month for you, end of the quarter, giving us some of your time to the Sales Hacker community. And as always, to the audience, you're awesome. Thanks for showing up today. And we'll see you around hopefully soon. Good luck end of quarter, end of month, everybody.